Now the next type of resource I want to show you is vocabulary cards. And we have several different types of flashcards here. We have some small cards, some larger cards, and some really large cards. Each of these are a bit larger and easier to hold on to than the small slips of paper that we were looking at earlier. And each of these might be better for certain types of activities. For these smaller cards, we've given you a few different examples of formatting that you can use. So I can make one-sided or two-sided flashcards here that include my vocabulary word. It could include a definition or a sample sentence. I could even add photos to this template here. So here on the right side is a popular format for creating flashcards. And then on this side, we have a popular format for things such as roleplay cards. And it's justified to the left if you prefer that over the center justification on this side. So for my lesson, I was doing a role play as part of my production, and so let me see if I can create a few role play cards that I can hand students or groups of students so they know what their role is during that role play. I'm going to copy this over here so that I get the same kind of formatting. Alright, so I was able to make a few roleplay cards for this lesson, and I could also make some other types of flashcards if I wanted. I can make larger flashcards as well. Or if I wanted to create a simple little reading passage for students, then I could do that here. Simply adding my title and then some text for the students to read. So here are several different smaller cards that you can create. But one that I find really useful is just a large vocabulary card. These can be really useful for placing new vocabulary up on the wall or on the board. And making them really large makes it easy for your students to be able to read them from anywhere in the classroom. So for many of my lessons, I like to just come in here and duplicate several of these vocabulary cards. And then start adding some of my vocabulary. All right, so in less than a minute, I was able to create vocabulary cards for all of my vocabulary words. Now, if I wanted to, I could even turn these into full sentences so that now my students can understand these words in the context of a sentence. This is a great teaching technique, and it's easy to do using these cards as well. These cards were super easy to create, and now I can print them out on whatever color of paper I like. This kind of resource takes very little effort to create, but it adds so much value to my lesson, and I can use it for any kind of lesson that I teach. All right, so one of the reasons why I love using vocabulary cards for my lesson is that it's a great way to add color and fun and creativity to my vocabulary list. So rather than having my students focus on a simple list on my whiteboard or a list in their course book, I can add a lot more creativity and fun. Some people would say that I'm adding pizzazz to my lesson and to my classroom. They're fun to look at, and they're even easier to read from across the classroom. Now, a second reason why I like to use vocabulary cards is that I can hang them up anywhere in the classroom, and so I can actually move them off my whiteboard and put them somewhere on the wall instead of having a list that takes up valuable space on my whiteboard. This is a really easy and quick way to make the walls of your classroom pop with all kinds of fun color and to maximize the space that you have on your whiteboard for the rest of your lesson. Now, the third reason why I like to use vocabulary cards has to do with time, but also has to do with a little bit with culture and relationship. So let me explain that. So while writing a simple vocabulary list on the board doesn't take a lot of time, writing long sentences on the board or graphing out some kind of grammar problem, these things take a lot of time. So if you find yourself writing a lot on your whiteboard, you can use this same kind of vocabulary template to save yourself some time, but also to improve cultural sensitivity and relationship in your classroom. So I grew up in the United States, and one of the things that a teacher will do in the United States if they have a lot to write on the board and they don't have a lot of time to do their teaching is they'll do this. They'll turn and they'll face the board and they will teach while they're writing on the board. We call this talking to the board. Not only does it make what I'm saying quieter and harder for the students to hear, but by talking with my back facing my students, it can actually make some of my students feel a bit offended or disrespected. This is a normal thing to see in a classroom in America. A teacher teaching while their back is turned to their class. But it's good to know that there are a lot of places in the world where this would not be the cultural norm. That it's not normal to talk to somebody with your back facing them. So if I want to be aware of this as a teacher, then that means that I'm not going to talk to my students while I'm writing on the board. And the implication of that is that I'm going to spend a lot of time with my back to my students quietly writing on the board. And it's going to take a long time for me to write 10 of these sample sentences for all of my vocabulary words. And so rather than writing all of those words and rather than being tempted to accidentally talk to my students while my back is facing them, I can simply write some of those sentences on one of these vocabulary cards. And this allows me to look directly at my students while I am teaching them this part of my lesson, and I can even move around the classroom if I needed to. This saves me a little bit of time, but it increases the relationship as I am teaching. And so my students will feel more honored, more respected, and when I'm ready to move on to my next point, I simply grab a piece of tape, stick it, and pop it on my whiteboard or somewhere on my wall. It's quick and easy, saves time, creates more relationship, and hopefully my students will actually feel more respect in my classroom. And so you can use these vocabulary card templates to add pizzazz to your lesson, to move your vocabulary off the board in order to save space, to save time from writing long lists of sample sentences, but also as a way to make your classroom more relational, more honoring, and for your students to feel that love that you have for them. Not every lesson will require you to make these cards, but this is a simple, quick resource that you can use for just about every lesson you teach.